we will, depending upon the feedback we receive from providers, if we need to put something out in addition to the instruction sheet, we will certainly entertain doing that. We've allotted 2 hours this morning, which may be more than enough time, depending upon how many questions we get. So we really haven't lost that much ground in terms of being, I guess, 10 minutes off. With that, I think that's all I had to say in terms of a quick overview. Yeah. So why don't we just jump right into the actual cost detail sheet itself? I'm going to ask the consultant to go through the tabs and walk through it, and then we'll open it up for questions subsequent to that.
Okay.
So with that.
Okay. So. Yeah, thank you, Ron. So I'm Brian Allen. I'm with Alvarez and Marsal. I've been assisting DDA in creating this new cost detail tool. So as Ron mentioned, the goal today is to familiarize you all with the tool, to go through the tabs and to provide an example of how to fill the tool out. So this tool is, as Ron mentioned, a kind of a one-stop shop tool. You'll notice a self-direction tab in there as well. You're primarily going to be working in the budget and the PS and add-on tab within this tool. So and also stop me if there's any questions. Feel free to shoot us over a question, to write it and send it to us, or just speak up over the phone here. So the first tab that you see here is the instructions tab. We've given general instructions within the tool on what you need to do to actually fill it out and what to expect when you're filling it out. Where to begin, which would be on the budget tab. What to be aware of when filling it out. There's a lot of conditional formatting within the tool. So for example, it'll highlight gray when the tool is asking you to fill something out. It might highlight red if there's an error that needs to be fixed in the tool. But the bottom line is we wanted to create this tool to be very user-friendly, and the tool should be able to guide you through what you need to fill out and what you might be missing. Also, one thing to mention is when we send the tool over, and we're hoping to do that either this afternoon, no later than tomorrow, the cells that you need to actually be editing to fill out the tool will be the only cells that are unlocked. So there shouldn't be an error where you're overwriting formulas or where you might be messing up the tool by just editing where you shouldn't be. There will only be a select few cells on the tool that will be unlocked. So hopefully, and we appreciate feedback as you are able to go through it at your own leisure here, it'll be very easy to use. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start on let me just take out just a couple things so we're starting from scratch here. I'm going to go ahead and start on the budget tab. So this is where everyone will start when they're filling out the new waiver cost detail tool. The input table at the very top, starting with person's name, is where you would be filling out for your individual, your participant that you're working with. So you would fill out person's name, fill out the social security number, fill out your provider name and the PCIS2 provider ID, and then you want to fill out the plan effective date and the annual PCP date. This tool is created for the interim year. So both fiscal year 2018 through July 2019. So when we start, we can do this tool for any period within those dates. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a plan effective date. Let's say it starts tomorrow or starts on May 1st. Okay, and it would go for 1 year. So the first thing that you'll notice is the tables below are populating with the dates for fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2019. This tool should be automatically updating for you, and it should be, as I said, guiding you through the process here. So you can see already what dates you've selected in the tables below. This tool is available for both participants that are receiving traditional and self-direction services, And we're just going to go ahead and choose traditional here for the example that we're filling out, and is also available for all 3 waivers, including the 2 new waivers, family supports and community supports waiver. So since community pathways has the most, has the largest number of different service types and rates in the tool, let's go ahead and choose community pathways here. One good thing about the tool is that as you're filling it out, the services will automatically update depending on which waiver type you select. So family supports waiver has less services available. You would have less services available in the day services and support services dropdowns later on when you're filling out the tool. Okay, and then just going through the input table here, the next thing that you would fill out is the actual county that the participant lives in. So let's choose Baltimore County. The last thing that you'll notice in the input table is we've inserted a 3.5% COLA, a cost of living increase for fiscal year 2019. You could just go ahead and leave that in the tool. That means that the majority of the rates are going to increase by 3.5% in fiscal year 2019. Okay. Now, since day services, residential services, and employment services will still be using the matrix levels, the health medical level and the supervision assistance level in the interim year, you're going to want to go ahead and fill out these input tables as well. So let's go ahead and select, as an example, the matrix levels for these services. Everything that you're filling out in these input tables is going to drive the rates that you're going to see later on in when you're selecting your services. Okay, so we have filled out the input tables, both of them on the budget tab. We filled out the date for the services that are relevant for the participant. We filled out our waiver type in the participant county and all of the matrix levels that we need. So let's keep going down the sheet and start to fill out some of the services that this individual will need. So I'm going to go ahead and select day habilitation. Now, what you're going to notice is when you selected that, a couple of the cells actually highlighted gray. That's the tool telling you what to fill out. So day habilitation is a site-based service. So you would put in a site number, whatever that might be for record keeping purposes. And with site-based services, because where a person is receiving services isn't always the same county that they live in, it will ask you for the county that site-based service is being provided in. Typically, that would just be the same county that the participant lives in, but not necessarily. In this case, let's just go ahead and select Baltimore County as we selected before. Now, you have gray cells highlighting to the right of day habilitation. It's asking you for both fiscal year 2018 and fiscal year 2019, the actual number of days of service you need for that particular service for day habilitation. So, and another good thing about this tool is it tells you how many days are in the fiscal year just above. So in fiscal year 2018, there's 61 days. And fiscal year 2019, with the dates that we selected in our input table, there's 304 days. So since there's 61 days in fiscal year 2018, if I were to put 62 here, well, there's not that many days in the fiscal year, so that highlights red. So that's just an example of how the tool, when it highlights red, it's telling you that there might be an error in what you're inputting. Let's go ahead and just put in 30 days. So this person needs 30 days in fiscal year 2018. So for May and June, they need 30 days day habilitation services. Fiscal year 2019, maybe they need 100 days. So that's all we need to put right now for day habilitation. You'll notice at the top of the screen, the total provider budget is being separated by fiscal year 2018 and 2019 as well. And as you're filling out these services, it's updating for you. Okay.
Brian, can you hold on one second? I know that some people have asked questions, and
gotcha.
We're going to have to make one quick change so that we can actually see them and answer them.
Oh.
Give us 1 minute.
Oh, I thought they were popping out.
Sorry, folks. We just want to make sure it's easy for us to.
When will this tool? Oh, here's these questions.
Sorry about that, folks. We wanted to make sure that we could see your questions as we go along. Brian, you can pick up, and we'll take a look at questions and make sure we get those answered as they come in.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, we just inputted day habilitation services for this individual with 30 days in fiscal year 2018 and 100 days in fiscal year 2019. So let's add one more day service just to show an example of one that would not be site-based. So with community development services, you'll notice that when I select that drop-down and select CDS, neither the site number or the site-based county highlights gray. You don't need to fill that out. So you would just go right over to the actual days, which highlighted gray, and then we'll put in the number of days needed there. Okay. So that's a couple of examples of how you would fill out the meaningful day services table here. Going on down the sheet.
Brian, before you do that, there's a few questions that I'd like to answer related to the initial entry and the entry of day services.
Yes.
So the first question was whether or not this webinar was being recorded and will be available in the future.
Yes,
it is being recorded. It will be available. There was a question about the difference between the effective plan date and the annual PCP date. So the effective plan date would be when the services described in this plan start, and the annual plan date would be the date of the next annual plan. And so part of this, we know that everyone has a unique annual plan date. Whenever this tool is used for a service change, or for new services, it might not be a full 12 months until the next annual plan date. And so collectively, those create the two, the start and the end of the period of time being planned on this tool. So for someone who's doing an annual plan and describing the services for the coming 12 months, it would be a full 12-month period, but it may also be less than 12 months if you're adding a new service. There was a question about whether or not day habilitation would be capped at 250 days on an annual basis. The number of days of the meaningful day services, day habilitation CDS, I believe is capped on the number of days, operating days that your agency is authorized for. And so that would be the cap, and then it would be dependent on the individual's needs and their plan.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because this tool shows you how many days are actually in the fiscal year, but it really is going to be capped at the number of operating days for your particular agency. Since we don't know the operating days of every single agency when we were creating the tool, it's just sort of a guide.
There was a question about if a cell did not apply to a specific agency, can you leave it blank? That's generally all the gray cells should be filled out if you're doing a cost detail tool for your agency and that specific service. The gray highlights shift based on the service. So for example, under site number for community development services, there's not a specific site number for that service, but there is a specific site number for day habilitation. Okay. Sorry, there's quite a few questions. I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to come back. The problem is they kind of go with specific section.
Well, unless we want to just continue, kind of, finish part of your presentation and then go back to answering questions and then just kind of toggle back and forth, because you may not be able to get through all of them without being able to get through the rest of your presentation.
Yeah, there's a couple more items here that we could hit on just quickly. That relate to this. So there was a question: if the service is ongoing, why does the FY19 budget show in 11 months and not the full fiscal year? And this is really because we're shifting planning to be the 12 months of the plan year, and so that end date is the end of the plan year. There was a question about is the rate based on where the person lives or where the service is delivered? So for site-based services, there's a unique entry that Brian described to indicate the county, and that's the way that the current rate system works in PCIS2. So a lot of this tool is really to make it easier to specify the information that you are currently doing in the multiple different cost detail spreadsheets for each of the different services. But this entry really aligns with how data gets entered into PCIS2. There was a question about the PCP date, whether it was the date the team met or the date that the plan is submitted or completed to PCIS2, or is it the fixed annual IP date for the person? The PCP date, the annual PCP date, is that fixed date that never changes for someone. All right, Brian, let's go ahead and keep going, and we'll pick up the questions a little bit later.
Okay. So moving down the sheet and filling it out as you would, the next table that you see is personal supports. Now, personal supports is filled out on the PS and Add-On tool tab. So you'll notice that nothing is highlighted gray in this small one row personal supports table. So to fill out personal supports, let's go to the PS and Add-On Tool tab. Now, what you'll notice is that there's a personal supports tool table here in the top left corner of the tab. And there's two columns highlighted gray here, and there's a number of dates. These dates automatically update based upon the plan effective date, annual PCP date that you entered in the input on the budget tab. So it will run from May 2018 to April 2019. So based upon feedback that we received, we thought it would be beneficial to give providers the opportunity to put more or less hours of personal supports per month into these entries. So you can go ahead and start filling out the hours per month. And let's say you needed more in July, you could put in 100, and maybe more in August, you could put 150. And you would just continue to fill out this hours per month column here for the entire year based on what the participant needs. Now, you'll notice that there's a column next to hours per month that says hours per week. This was added really based upon CCS feedback to fill out the self-direction tab. It's there if it makes more sense to look at the hours per week of personal support service that an individual needs, but you can't fill out both of them. So if you fill out the hours per month here, you'll notice we have 750 total hours per month of personal support service for this plan year running from May 2018 to April 2019. And if you go back to the budget tab, everything is filled out in that personal supports table for you based upon what you inputted into the PS and Add-On tool personal supports tool table.
And what's significant about that is that it's breaking it across the fiscal year based on the months that you entered that information in for.
Yep. So, in fiscal year 2018, you have for the plan period that we chose, and you have May and June. We selected 50 hours per month for each. The unit type for personal supports is a quarter hour, so 100 hours times 4. It automatically broke out 400 units of personal support services for fiscal year 2018. So again, we're hoping that this is really user-friendly. It'll do the math for you. The rates populate for you based upon the county you selected, the number of hours you selected per month, and this table for personal supports is automatically filled out, and the total provider budget in the top right-hand corner is automatically updated. Need a pause before we go to support services? Okay. So that is filling out the personal supports portion of the budget tab. So let's go down to support services here. Now, as we mentioned before, the services available in these drop-downs automatically update based upon the plan type you select and the waiver type you select. So keep that in mind, because if you selected family supports or community supports, you would be looking at less services in these drop-downs than you would selecting community pathways.
Can you give an example of that?
So if we just went over to family supports waiver, and we instead of community pathways, we select family supports. There's no meaningful day source services available in family supports waiver. So you see that procedure code automatically highlighted red and shows as unavailable. And also, when you go to the support services, there's several more support services available in community pathways than there are in family supports. So just to show you how it automatically updates, and you won't need to guess and check, okay, what services are available in this waiver, what services are available in the other waiver. The tool should be able to guide you through that. Okay. So we're back into community pathways waiver, and we're looking at support services. Let's just choose a few services here. And let's choose a few services that have different unit types. So maybe one that has an hourly unit type, one an upper pay limit, and one a milestone. So I can show you how they look a little different in the tool, but again, it always highlights gray to show you what you need to fill out. So let's choose assistive technology and services. So when I choose that dropdown, the procedure code automatically populates as well as the unit type. Assistive technology and services is an upper pay limit. And so in fiscal year 2018 and 2019, there is a column called UPL/total entry, and it highlights gray here for you. So if you needed $1,000 of assistive technology and services for fiscal year 2018, maybe that was a June 15th payment, we'll just put 1,000 in here. And maybe we don't need anything for fiscal year 2019, we'll just leave that blank. But the point being that regardless of whether it's an hourly service, a quarter hour, an upper pay limit, a milestone, the tool will highlight and show you where to fill out. Okay.
Hey, Brian, can we emphasize that before you even get to the personal support, so either one of those tabs, that the budget screen has to be done first in order for that rest of that to pre-populate, right?
So for this to pre-populate, so all the rates and support services for personal supports and meaningful day services, you need to fill out the information on the actual input table here. So none of that will populate if you don't have the right information. So I just took away the participant county. You notice the rates all went away.
Right.
So the tool will prevent you from actually getting the rates if you don't take the time to fill out the input table. And if you don't fill out the matrix scores, it's not going to populate with the rates for day services. So it guides you in that way to make sure that you're filling out all the information you need. And I will reiterate, it looks like there's a lot of information on this tab. There's only a few cells again that you're able to fill out. I can't click on the rate. I can't click on the total amount, add-on amount, or anything within personal supports. There's just a few things that need to be filled out to give you the information that you need. So if we go to support services, let's choose another service that has a different unit type. So let's choose respite care services hour. So this is an hourly unit type. And instead of the UPL total entry column highlighting gray, you'll see that the units column highlights gray. So the rate automatically populates for $20.13 an hour, and then you will input the number of hours per fiscal year of service that you need. So you put in 100 there and maybe 500 there. Now the total amounts are updating. Again, the provider budget up here at the top of the screen is updating with those amounts as well. So you're just going through, clicking a service, and then filling out what the gray cells are. Let's do one more here. I want to choose a milestone service. Shoot.
Environmental assessment.
Yeah, let's go to environmental assessment. Okay, so I went ahead and selected the dropdown for environmental assessment. The unit type automatically updated milestone. It's a rate of $419.70. You'll notice the rate's a little higher in fiscal year 2019. Again, that's because we have the fiscal year 2019 COLA in place of 3.5%. So that rate is 3.5% higher. Let's say there's one milestone that's going to occur in fiscal year 2019 for an environmental assessment. Let's just put one in here. So the total amount is $419. Oh, and we'll take a look at that. It should be $434. We'll change that. So it automatically updates with the total amount, and then automatically updates the total provider budget at the top right of the screen. Okay. All right. So Daniel, should we go to residential services, or do you want to pause?
Let's pause and cover a few questions before we get into the add-ons and some of the other some of the other factors. So there was a question: are these only required to be completed for modified service funding plan requests, or do they have to be created for existing plans that don't require a change? So this tool is really meant to replace anywhere where you were previously using the cost detail and those separate spreadsheets. So that would be the modified service funding plan request. It's required for any new people coming into service. So people coming into the new waivers, you'd be using this cost detail tool. Since the services available under these new waivers didn't previously exist, and there wasn't a cost detail tool for that. There was a clarification requested to re-explain the dates that you put on the top of the form. So the plan effective date, that's the most important date. That's when you're requesting that services start for the individual. So when you're doing your modified service funding plan or a new person coming into service, there would be an identified start date for those services, and that's what you enter in there. Especially for the people that are coming in new to the two new waivers, they're going to want to start their services soon. But they probably don't all want to have PCP dates at the end of April, beginning of May the following year. And so that annual plan date would be their team chosen PCP date for the next time they'll need to go through the planning process. And by definition, that has to be less than 12 months from the date that services started. And so that's really what those two dates mean. There was a question, what happens from 5/2019 through the end of the fiscal year? I'm not quite sure what that means. Essentially, whenever you start it through the end of the fiscal year, the goal would be to plan the current fiscal year and then plan the following fiscal year. If you have an annual plan date that doesn't go all the way to the end of fiscal year 19, the thought would be that you would do this tool again to plan for the remainder of that fiscal year 19. So it's really from start date to the plan date, and then when you get to that plan date, you do it again. A couple questions. When CCSs are completing a waiver, this tool for a waiver packet, how are we to know which waiver the consumer will be on, since DDA determines which waiver the consumer qualifies for? Also, for the name of the provider, is that optional? So this is a good question. So this cost detail tool is really for figuring out what someone's services will actually cost and be authorized for once they become eligible for the waiver. And so this tool will principally be completed by a provider who's agreeing to serve someone in the same way that the existing cost detail tool is used. There was a question, what do you do if the person loses DAHAB and CDS in the same day? Maybe uses CDS? So right now, DAHAB and CDS are full day services. So at this point in time, and this will be true all the way through the end of fiscal year 19, day and CDS are full day services. And so if someone has both on their plan, the regional office will be looking at whether or not all the days add up to more than are available. So you couldn't have 250 days of DAHAB and CDS, but you could blend them. I mean, you could have CDS on 2 days a week and day on the other days of the week. There's a question about when this form needed to begin being used.
Once we complete the webinar today, I'm going to be sending out copies to all providers. We'll be sending out actual copies of the form, and so when we start our new waiver services for the new waivers, that's when we expect these cost detail sheets to be used for the new waiver services, which is, in effect now. They're in effect right now. So
right. So as soon as this tool comes out, you can start using it.
Yeah.
The form does have the county and site number for those site-based services. There was a question about that. There was a question about funding being decided not on a fiscal year, but on an individual plan year. And that is the change that we're making. So we're shifting the mindset from here's your funding for fiscal year to here's your funding for plan year. The challenge to that is that we still are functioning in PCIS2, which is based on the fiscal year. And so that's a big thing that this tool does that the previous cost detail sheets did not do, is that it allocates between fiscal years. There was a question, will a new cost detail page be required every time a new PCP is developed or reviewed? And so going forward, so for the new waivers, the goal would be to use this as they enter service, and then when their plan comes due, you'll do this again. This is partially to align the system with where we're headed in the future as the transition happens to LTSS, where the plan is done and reviewed on an annual basis. There was a question about needing to put in how many days assume for the meaningful day services for the current fiscal year and the next fiscal year. What if it's ongoing? Again, we're planning in 12-month increments, and so it is important to enter those dates that fall in between when you start services and the date of the annual PCP. Okay, Mr. Simons announced a few months ago that all day providers under 250 operating days would increase to 250. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Yes, that is still the case. And so again, when you're filling this out, you need to align with your number of operating days. But if that change hasn't happened, I guess it's still working its way through the process.
Yeah. It's effective fiscal year 19.
Fiscal year 19. So in July 1, that increase would take effect. This is a good question. So when Brian mentioned that all of the information at the top of the screen needs to be filled out, it needs to be filled out for the services that you're proposing. So the question was, I'm the res provider, not the day provider. How will I have access to the matrix numbers for another agency? You won't. That's fine. You're filling this tool out for the services that you as your agency are providing. So in this example, since there isn't any residential service, if Brian took away the matrix score for residential, all of the rates stay in place for the day services. There was a question, if this does not identify ongoing funding, does one cost detail need to be resubmitted each year? And the answer is yes. So again, moving for the new waivers in particular to authorization by plan year, that will need to be resubmitted for any changes. And they will be submitted based on the fixed IP or PCP date. Question, if the person changes a plan after the plan effective date, and thus will serve the person less than a year, how is that treated? So this would be the example where someone leaves service, right? And so an updated cost detail sheet could be submitted, reducing that request for authorization. The regional office could reduce it out. Okay, there's a question about continued one-on-one supports. So I think with that, we'll take a pause from the questions. We'll come back to them in a little bit. But Brian, let's go over residential services and then look at the add-ons.
Yes. All right, so let's pick up with continuing to go down the budget tab sheet here. So now we've gone to residential services, and as we just spoke about, make sure that the residential drop-down matrix scores are filled out before you fill out these services, or the rates will not appear. So let's go ahead and go to residential services, and let's select drop-down community living group home. So just as we did with the services that we selected before in support services and meaningful day services, community living group home, when you select it, the procedure code populates, the unit type and the rate populates based upon the county and the matrix scores that you selected. And you would go ahead and select the number of units for that in each fiscal year as you've done previously in the tab with the other services that you've selected. So let's select maybe 50 units for fiscal year 2018 and 100 for 2019. Total amounts populate, and this updates your total provider budget updates again at the top of the screen. Okay. All right, let's put in one more residential service, maybe shared living. Actually, let's put in shared living matching service to just show a service with a different unit type. So that would be a milestone payment. The rate for $1,911 in fiscal year 2018. And let's just choose one milestone unit for that particular fiscal year. Again, you're just filling out what highlights gray here. The subtotals update, as does your total provider budget in the top right portion of the screen. So very similar to the other tables that you're filling out, the meaningful day services and the support services, just selecting the drop down and then filling out the number of units that you need for the individual by fiscal year. So with the regional use only, we don't need any of that. So you would, when you're filling this out, you would go ahead and ignore the last table at the bottom. This is just for the regions to fill out when it's submitted to them. Again, this is a tool for everyone. We didn't want multiple versions of the tool floating out. So the regions will use this tool. Those that fill out self-direction plans would use this tool, as well as yourselves. So you'll find some information within the actual worksheet that you will not need to fill out. So at this point, you filled out the entire budget tab. You've filled out everything you need for the input tables for meaningful day services, personal support services, and residential services. The last thing that we will show is what if a person needs add-on services for day or residential. So if you go back to the PS and add-on tool tab, you'll notice that there are a number of tables to the right of the personal supports table. So as you recall, for the meaningful day services that we filled out on the budget tab, we chose day habilitation and CDS. So let's say there are add-on hours needed for day habilitation. So we go to meaningful day add-on, the meaningful day add-on tool, and we select the drop-down for day habilitation. So you'll notice that several cells highlighted gray here, meaning that you need to fill them out to calculate that rate for your add-on services. It's also important to note that the way that this add-on rate calculates is the same way that it calculates in PCIS 2, by asking you the time frame that you need the services, the annual operating days for your particular agency, and then the hours per week that you would need those services. So every individual provider would put in the number of annual operating days that they have, but let's, for the example here, put in 250. The start date in this particular example, let's have it as the same start and end date that we chose for our plan effective date and the IP date. Okay, 5/1/2019. Let's say that there are 20 hours a week for add-on day services that we need. And let's assume that you will need that for the 30 days you selected in fiscal year 2018 and the 100 days you selected for 2019. So the rate automatically calculates based upon the operating days, the start end date, and the hours per week. And then that rate multiplies by the days that you selected. And now we have the add-on amounts that by fiscal year for day habilitation. So if you go back to your budget tab, you'll notice that the add-on amount automatically populated for day habilitation on your budget tab. So the $2,766.91 for fiscal year 2018 is shown here, and it matches exactly what you have here. So that's one example of how you would add, fill out the Meaningful Day add-on tool and request add-on service add-on hours for day habilitation. So let's just go down and do the transportation add-on tool, which is even a little bit simpler here. So let's click day habilitation. The number of dollars you need for the transportation add-on. The most that you could have for a plan period is $2,000. Select that amount and just the number of days that you need it. So again, let's say 30 in fiscal year 2018 and 100 in 2019. So it automatically splits that $2,000 by fiscal year for you. 462 in fiscal year 18, 1538 in fiscal year 19, and then you go to your budget tab, and that automatically updated into your add-on amount for day habilitation services as well. So that's all pre-populating for you. All right, so the last thing that we'll show here is the residential direct support add-on tool. So as you recall, for residential services, we chose Community Living Group Home. So let's choose that here, Community Living Group Home. You'll choose your start and your end date. Let's make it the same period that you chose for your plan, 2019. And let's say you needed 20 hours a week for 50 and 100 days. It's the same principle that as you did for the Meaningful Day add-on tool. And now you have requested an additional $2,800 of add-on services for Community Living Group Home for in fiscal year 18, and then $5,800 in fiscal year 19. The last add-on option would be Awake Overnight, and again, it's the same principle as we were doing before. Okay. All right. And if you look back at your budget tab, the add-on amounts for residential services automatically populated with the $5,600 in combined residential add-on services for community living, and then the $11,698 in fiscal year 2019 for community living as well. And again, everything is updating in your total provider budget table at the top right of your screen. So when you're filling out a cost detail for a participant with a traditional plan type, that's about all you would fill out. That shows you how to fill out the input tables, how to go through the different tables in the budget tab, how to fill out the personal supports table, and each of the meaningful day and residential add-on tool tables, as well to select add-on services. So with that, we want to go back and look at
More questions.
More questions.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Brian. I think that answers the question about continued one-on-one supports. So there's a separate, so for these additional direct supports in the add-ons, they have their own date range. So if it's continuous, you'd match the date range to what you have in the first tab. If it's a temporary need, which does happen, and there's a way that that gets entered into PCIS2 and authorized, you would do that on the add-on tool in the different date range, different number of days, etc. If service is provided with terms of ongoing, will a cost detail need to be completed annually on the PCP date? If not, how is such document that services do not end after the annual PCP date? So this is a question we answered earlier, that we'll need to do this on each annual plan date. So the system based on, or the tool based on the COLA that will be applied in this coming fiscal year is adjusting the rates for each of the fiscal years. So that's why it's so imperative to that this tool does that breakout between fiscal years, so that you can see what that total budget is for the individual in each of the fiscal years with the right rates. It appears that there needs to be a separate cost tool done for each waiver. Is that correct? Yes and no. A separate cost detailed tool needs to be done for each individual, for each provider. So if you are a provider that's providing 3 of the individual's 5 services, you do a cost detail for those 3 services. And they can be in any one of the 3 waivers. If that person's receiving 2 services from Ron's agency, Ron would need to do a cost detail for those 2 services. Brian, can you go to a UPL? So in the UPL, if all of the UPL will be expended in one fiscal year, do you need to put anything in the second gray tab?
No.
No. Okay. So you do need to fill in the gray shaded areas, but this really applies for any service and the number of units across fiscal years. If there are units in one fiscal year, you would enter that. If there are not units in the other fiscal year, you can add a 0 or leave it blank. That's fine.
Exactly.
There's a question about whether or not we could demonstrate nursing case management and delegation in BSS services. Brian, could you show, let's show a behavioral assessment or assessment.
So in support services, we would go ahead and select BSS, behavioral assessment. And so that is a milestone service. And we would just fill it out exactly the same way that we fill out the milestone for environmental assessment. Let's say there would be 1 milestone in fiscal year 2019. So we'd select that, and then that would automatically populate based upon the rate that you selected. Although I did notice a little nit that I will fix. Yeah.
And then a nursing consultation.
Okay, you would just select the drop down for nurse consultation. That is a quarter hour unit type, and you would just select the number of units that you need by fiscal year. The same way that you selected the hours by fiscal year for respite care services that we demonstrated earlier. So let's just 100 units in each fiscal year there.
Okay. One important thing to note, the next question relates to personal support. So as Brian's been filling out this tool, he's added lots of different services and potentially services and configurations that don't match the limitations in the waiver. So for example, someone could not be receiving personal supports at the same time as they're receiving residential service. So he did that so you could see all the elements of this tool. But as you fill it out and as the regions review this and enter it into PCIS2, all of those limitations that are in place on the services as documented in the waiver are true and in place. Similarly, as Brian mentioned earlier, he's showing kind of the use case of the Community Pathways waiver, which has the most services. You can't request nursing services, for example, in the family supports waiver. There was a question about why the calculations for personal support are in units and not hours. They're in units because, so it's a bit of a hybrid based on how the current rate system works, because the current rate system is based on hours per week. And so to determine the right rate, it needs hours per week. But the unit under which personal supports is authorized under is a 15-minute quarter-hour increment.
And putting it into PCIS2, PCIS2 has it as a quarter hour.
Right. There was a question of how many of these sheets do you need to complete for different services for one person, i.e. day hab and personal supports for the same person. So if both are being provided by one provider, then it's only one of these tools. It's really no different than what you're currently doing. So as it is, each provider currently completes the cost detail. In fact, the current cost details, there's different ones for each of the services. So there's a unique cost detail for personal supports, for day, for residential. Now, so here on this tool, if you're a provider that's providing multiple services, you can document them all on a single version of this tool. To avoid uncertainty, should providers enter 0 in gray cells that have been ignored, such as ATS fiscal year 19? It certainly can be done. That may make it easier for the regional office just to make sure it was not an omission, but intentional. You don't need to, as we mentioned earlier, but it's not a bad idea. The FY19 rate calculations are not accurate for any of the calculations. I don't know that that's.
So there is the COLA is not. Yeah, it's the COLA.
Okay.
So before a simple change when we send it out this afternoon, that will be edited.
Okay. We are a new provider and provide discovery, community exploration, CE, and SE. Can you show an example of how to fill out the form? And so these services would all fit under the meaningful day services. So Brian, click on that drop down. And so we have career exploration, we have employment discovery and customization, supported employment. And so each of these services, again, because they're day-based services, you'd identify the number of days in the year, and those are still based on that employment and day matrix score. Okay. All right, so there was a question about whether or not this would be used for reductions.
Well, I mean, to the extent that it has to, I mean, it changes the.
Yeah, so, I mean, what we want to do is we want to go back, and if there's a change, once this is done, i.e. a reduction,
Yes.
that we'd update this so that it gets reflected correctly in PCIS2. Can individuals in need of personal support services also request support services such as environmental assessment? And the answer is yes. There's per the waiver definition and limitations, many of the support services are available to people in any setting. Okay, there was a question on the rate and the number of units for support services. We will double check those to make sure that everything ties out. Thank you for pointing that out. There was a question, can the PCP date be different than the effective plan date? And the answer is absolutely. For people entering the new waivers, again, they may start service on March 5th. But might not have an annual plan, or might have an annual plan date of September 10th, based on the individual's desires. When will the sheet start to be used? As we mentioned, this is the mechanism for identifying services for people in the new waivers. So as soon as this goes out, it can start being used.
And it'll be used for all 3 waivers.
Correct. The waiver allows for a cap of 360 hours of respite. Your example did not reflect an error in red. Did the hour limit increase? So for the new waivers, there's not a limit other than the budget for respite services, and so is that right?
Based on assessed need.
Right, based on assessed need for those services. So again, it's a team planning process on service need. The limitations documented in the waiver absolutely still apply. We can't stress the importance of being familiar with the waiver. So the waiver applications that describe the services and the limitations are all available on the DDA website. What happens if they do not use all of the hours in a given month? So the way that this works, so the personal supports currently in PCIS 2, the personal supports authorization is a yearly authorization. And so that is it's not a monthly authorization. That monthly calendar was provided to help the team identify and plan out how much service is actually needed in the year. All right. If the authorization of the service ends on the annual PCP date, what is the expectation of a timely continuation if the team does not meet until the annual PCP date? So it's really important that PCP meetings happen in advance of the plan date, the annual PCP date, so that the paperwork has time to flow through the process. Now, if that's not done on time, the expectation is that those services would continue to not put someone at risk. But it's very important, and we can't stress this enough, that that planning's done on time, and that's going to become even more of an issue as we move forward with LTSS. So yes, and kind of along the same note, we're partially in a transition year here, right? And so as we move eventually to LTSS, the annual PCP, what was formerly called the IP, will contain the specific services that are authorized for an individual. And so it will bring together these disparate pieces. So this cost detail tool is an interim tool to be used until we get to plans and payment and billing through LTSS. So this really will just be used through the end of fiscal year 19. So for the people in the new waivers, you will likely need to do this twice in the next, once now, and then again in the next fiscal year to plan through the end of fiscal year 19. There was a question, do we need to redo cost detail that has already been submitted for services that begin July 1st? So if you've submitted cost details for people in entering community pathways, those do not need to be redone at this point. This cost detail is necessary, though, for people entering the new waivers. There was a question about whether this tool would replace the budget tool that the CCSs are using with the waiver packets, and it will not. This tool is much more detailed because this has to get to the specific authorization for providers. The CCSs should continue to use the simpler budget tool as individuals submit their waiver packets. As mentioned earlier, each provider needs to fill this tool out, so this is provider specific. We'll touch on this at the very end. There was a question about providing an example of the self-directed plan type. Given who's on the call, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we'll, if we have time at the end, we'll spend 5 minutes on that. Can you clarify when this form will be released? The new Community Pathways waiver has not been approved, and the new services cannot be effective until 7/1/19. So these are all very good points. So this tool will be available this week to you to start using. For Community Pathways, the services that only the services that are authorized can be requested now in the approved Community Pathways waiver. All of the services that are available in the 2 new waivers can be requested. There was a question, do the new waivers have the same waiver eligibility criteria as the Community Pathways waiver?
Yes,
And
with
the
the
answer is
exception
yes.
of age. So in terms of participants for the family supports waiver would have to be under the age of 22.
Can the service provider write the cost detail, or is this something that the coordinator does? And this is why we have you all on the phone. So just as you do today and complete the cost detail, you'll need to keep doing the cost detail just using this new format as providers. There's a question, will this worksheet be located in PCIS2? And the answer is no. This worksheet is to get at the right amount to be authorized in PCIS2 in the same way that you're using the what I think originally were Word documents and then got moved to Excel, but didn't have rates or didn't have a lot of detail. There was a question on self-direction. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit when we get to the end. To clarify, a new cost detail will be required for each year when the annual PCP for an individual, for all individuals served. Yes, that is the case. It's that annual planning cycle. So if you're providing a new service to start in May, at the end of the fiscal year, in June 2018, we have to submit it again July 1. So the answer is no. If you can plan through the next annual plan date. So if someone's annual plan date is July 1, then you should really probably already be doing your planning for the next fiscal year. You could use this tool to submit that new service and then do your planning starting July 1 onward. Since there are no agreed upon rates for shared living until 7/1/19, how would this form get used? That is correct. There are not yet rates for shared living. So what we may do as this goes out, we may actually drop those services from this tool at this point in time.
Shared living or supported living? Shared.
Shared living. Shared living. So the shared living, the shared living we're working through. So this tool could be used, I believe, for, there's a version of it. So if you click in shared living. So the first shared living service, Brian. Okay. So we will make sure that that's clear. I recognize that that there are not yet rates for shared living that have been agreed to. Likely what we'll do is we'll make that an upper pay limit, which will be reflective of the current environment. Is the plan effective date is not always necessarily going to be the start date. We recognize that, but in the same way in PCIS 2, we enter an authorized start date. That's really what you're getting at. So it's when you would want service to be authorized. Someone may start a day later. Who submits the cost detail sheet? It's providers, as we mentioned earlier. Does a one-time only request for a service, i.e. assistive technology, need to include all of the ongoing services provided by the same provider? No, I think this tool could be used for that specific request and a modified service funding plan. So you do the whole modified service funding plan and then add in the service and use the cost detail tool. What is the time frame for DDA to review the cost detail, given that this form will be completed every year? Is there enough time between the PCP and the start date? So I believe that we've said that DDA reviews service funding plans, modified service funding plans within 20 days. And so it's important that that these are submitted enough in advance of when services are anticipated to start, so there's enough time for that review to happen. So if someone has several providers, a cost detail will need to be completed by each provider. That's correct. Where does the residential site get entered to determine the rate? So that is based on the participant's county.
Correct.
At the very top.
Yep.
Okay, for community living group home, for a full FY year, we'd put in, for a full fiscal year, we'd put in 365 days. And that's correct. There was a question, can you have personal supports and residential at the same time? As I mentioned, the answer is no. We were demonstrating all the features of this tool. We don't need a new cost detail for each type of service anymore, correct? Meaning one form for all types of service. That's exactly right. That's the big change, because I think there were 5 different tools with all the new added services. We would have had many cost detail tools, and the goal was to put it on one form for a single provider. What does a milestone service type mean? That means that it is a service that is paid when a certain outcome is received or accomplished. So for example, a behavioral assessment, when that assessment is complete, then you can bill for the service. All right, previously you would indicate on the cost detail if the service listed were requesting existing or annualized, etc. So this is, again, this is the amount of service between dates. And so you would enter the service and how much falls in that period that you're being authorized for. How would you indicate a reduction in services on this form? So if that's in the case of a modified service funding plan request, so you would do a modified service funding plan request, which I believe indicates that there's a reduction, and then complete this form for what the new authorization should be. So if you ended the service at the end of the fiscal year, you'd zero out everything that was there in the out year. A lot of folks have ongoing add-on service. Will this have to be approved annually now? This goes with the whole annual review of these services. And so you'd submit another one. The process would be the same for an add-on versus other services. Is an add-on rate determined by the operational days or the day between the dates entered? And it's based on, so if you go to the add-on, Brian. And so this is based on the add-on, the rates chosen based on the hours per week.
Hours per week and operating days.
How do you add transportation to personal supports? You can't do that. So transportation is a standalone service, and so that standalone service can be added. Where would you add on physical therapy for rehabilitation? That's such a good question. I'm glad you asked it. So one of the things that we've been really working hard to do is to make sure that we unbundle these services. So any sort of professional services that might have been included in an add-on in the past need to be identified as a standalone support service, and it needs to make sure that it fits underneath a specific service definition. There's a question, is the only transportation reimbursement in day the wheelchair add-on? And the answer is yes, that's correct. Again, transportation services, there is a standalone option for that. Can you go down to the residential add-on? Yeah, so one of the things, again, and this kind of is all related, the add-ons are really direct support and awake overnight. So anything that isn't that, any professional support, any transportation, that all needs to be identified separately. So we had an issue historically where we bundled a lot of things under those services that didn't fit in the definition, and so those items need to be separately requested. There's a question about being able to view the formulas in the cell. The tool to make sure that it's reliable has been locked down, and so the cells that are gray are the cells that you can enter information into. One-time only add-ons are entered just through the add-on page, just with a limited window of time. But additional things like transition services fall under the support services category. Which relates to the next question. How do you add furniture, one-time costs for residential? That really does fit into the support services under transition. Since we do not yet have this tool, when do we have to start doing these at each of the PCP meetings? So again, the tool will go out this week, and you can start using it in place of the old cost details. For add-ons, I see there is no detailed description of what the add-on is. 1-to-1, 1-to-4, or maybe ILOD for residential services. Is this detailed in the SFP versus on this form? That's correct. That would be included in documentation for the modified service funding plan request or the service funding plan. This really was meant to just capture the specifics of the rate in the same way that the cost detail was previously. Okay. This is good. I'm glad everyone realizes that there were some conflicting services on the tool. So in the same way that personal supports and residential doesn't work, shared living and residential doesn't work. When updated in accordance with each annual plan date, how is the cost detail submitted? This would be through the same exact channels that are being used today, which I believe is the CCS consolidating that information from providers through the modified service funding plan or service funding plan planning process. There was a question about what it would look like to include the nursing services. We demonstrated that a little bit earlier. Take a look at, you can look at it when you get to the tool. Each of the services have slightly different limits, but I believe they're all quarter-hour services. And so you just enter the number of units. There was a question about the CCS role in this. And so the CCS role in this is really gathering this documentation the same way that you do today. So when a service funding plan is coming together or modified service funding plans are coming together, you gather that and submit it to the regional office. Where do supported employment services get entered? Those go under the meaningful day. And so you can see supported employment, career exploration is in the drop down that Brian's highlighted. We have a per mile add-on for day community transportation. Where would we account for this? So there is the wheelchair add-on. There is a transportation support service, but that will need to be reviewed by the regional office in alignment with the waiver, because today transportation, I believe, is included in the day rate.
Yes, it is.
And overall, as we mentioned earlier, it looks like we're not, the rates aren't incrementing up based on the COLA. So we'll make sure that that's corrected, because all services will get the 3.5% COLA increase.
All the services?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
BSS services may not be predictable at the beginning of the plan year. May need to change for behavioral support plan mid-year. How do you plan for that when completing this form? In the same way that you do today. If there's a known need, you request it. If it's not a known need, then when that need arises, you'll have to submit a modified service funding plan request. With our existing population, do we do one of these as the annual plan date comes up for people already in service?
So the CCSs will be meeting with the individuals and be doing discussions throughout the year. So if there's no anticipated plan, you could start to prepare that, but you would want, that would need to be confirmed through the planning process and the final decisions of the participant to continue it.
Yeah. And part of this, I mean, this is really getting us prepared for how the system will function in the future with the transition to LTSS. So it's helpful to start breaking out these services, understanding what someone's needs are, and getting the amount of that service documented. Can an individual use funds across fiscal years but within their budget span, or are they limited to utilization within the fiscal year allocation? I believe that PCIS2 has been set up to allocate by fiscal year.
It can be adjusted if need be.
Right.
But it won't affect their funding in accordance with their plan, right?
Will we be held to the monthly allocation for personal supports? The answer is no. Since this will move from being submitted annually at the individual's PCP date, will there be a phase-out date for completing a modified service funding plan request? Services and all services needed can be just reflected in the personal plan. That really is at the end of fiscal year 19. The modified service funding plan process, service funding plan process will still be in effect through the end of fiscal year 19. Will existing services the individual is receiving be visible in the system, i.e. personal care attendant services? So all of DDA's services are visible in PCIS2. Part of the goal of this and for the new waivers, there's additional detail captured around all these support services that previously wasn't available. So all DDA services will be visible. There was a question about where supplementals for personal supports apply, and really those do not. So it's all hours. So you can request the hours that are needed for personal supports. Any other services that may have been bundled under personal supports need to be separately requested using the support services. You stated that this will only be used when the current cost detail would be used, MS FPR and new individuals, but you also stated that it would be done each year at the annual PCP meeting. When will we begin using this for the annual PCP meetings for existing individuals? I guess at the next annual PCP date for them. Can CDL services be provided in the home if the individual chooses not to leave their home and participate in day or community integration?
No, CDS is meaningful day services in the community. It's not services in the home.
So in the home would have to be personal supports.
Personal supports, right?
Will the other services the individual is receiving be in the system? Same question as before. Am I correct in assuming we are to start using this new form in the new fiscal year? All these services for community pathways will become available with the waiver renewal, but for the other waivers, you're supposed to start using it now.
So for community pathways waiver, existing services as approved in the waiver right now, you can use it. You just can't add on the new services because they're not approved yet.
To understand again, if someone does not use the number of days per month, they cannot be stockpiled at the end of the year, or does it matter? So this is personal supports. Again, those are available for the entire year in the current system. I recently submitted a modified service funding plan request for personal support, service alignment, and was told transportation was capped at $1,400. Has there been an increase in this cap for transportation?
So transportation in the community pathways waiver under the renewal has been proposed to be increased to $7,500. That is not in effect today. It will not be in effect until we get approval from CMS. Therefore, the current limit under community pathways for transportation as a standalone service is $1,400.
How will this be done in LTSS and who will be completing it? I don't want to get too much into that to confuse it, but it will be combined with the plan, and we'll have lots of time to talk about that going forward. Will this form replace the service funding plan for TYs? It will not replace the written service funding plan, but it will replace the separate cost details that were attached to that service funding plan. Will a similar tool for FY20 be released later on to help providers who don't have access to services in LTSS until later to convey the cost? We're going to look at that because there will need to be some aid in planning what the services look like as they continue to change. But again, to kind of keep this conversation grounded, this tool is for right now to carry us through fiscal 19. Will these and the modified service funding plan requests still be submitted electronically to the same email addresses? Again, the same process can be used for these with the regional offices. For people already in service, will we need to complete the new cost details for them immediately or beginning July 1, as we said earlier, on their annual PCP IP date? Can you show the drop down for residential? And so what we have here is the group home. We have the group home trial experience. We know that that occasionally gets used. We have shared living, which is the current version of shared living. And then we also have a host home stipend and matching service, which is more where shared living is going. But to the point made earlier, we don't yet have agreed to rates for that. So when this tool goes out, we'll remove those services. And then the shared living will be in there as an upper pay limit based on the current worked out details for that individual. When this is complete and we're submitting it to the DDA, will it be submitted in hard copy or electronic? The goal would be to send it electronically, although it does need to be sent securely. Still not following the interaction between the current CP waiver and the proposed renewal CP application. So there's a transition period at play. And so currently you have certain service definitions that are true in the current waiver. The two new waivers added additional support services. Those are showing up in the tool, but they're not yet available in the Community Pathways waiver. Are these rates for training purposes or these actual rates for personal supports? These are actual rates for personal supports that match the current funding system. Can individuals in need of personal support services also request support services such as environmental assessment? And the answer is yes. If there is no change in service being provided from one plan year to the next year, would you still need this form to be done? Would you still do a modified service funding plan if there's no change? And the goal is to do this on a yearly basis to reevaluate services. It could look exactly the same as it did the previous year. For providers approved for BSS and nursing services, do they need to do anything prior to being able to start adding those services to the cost detail and billing? For new providers authorized for BSS and nursing, these can be added in the cost detail. DDA will be providing additional information on how to invoice for these services. How do we determine the residential rate if the matrix is not yet completed for the individual? You can. The rate system is currently based on the matrix score, and so you'd need to wait on the matrix score. Will PCIS2 reflect a breakdown of the annual funding across fiscal years, i.e. show totals? And I believe it will. Just to clarify, we only need to add the new services that are being requested. For example, when requesting add-ons for residential, that's my understanding. But in that instance, I would include the base residential service. Where would you enter a one-time only request for furniture? As we talked about earlier, that's in the support services. Will the form calculate without a waiver entered? There are still some people receiving services and not in a waiver who have lost waiver funding for a period of time. If you need to select a waiver, and so if someone was in Community Pathways and lost eligibility, select that waiver. The same rules apply in terms of adding changes if you're not in the waiver. And it's very important to maintain waiver eligibility. If an individual adds a service such as personal supports, would you need to fill in all the day CDS info or just personal supports? Just personal support. So use it for whatever, in the same way that you would have used each of those tools, use it for those. Will we need to submit all the backup support, ongoing and add-ons each year? And the requirements for documentation of the regional office would mirror what currently is required. When submitted after the PCP and nothing changes, does it get sent in without a modified service funding plan request? Does it get submitted to the same email address? Again, I think you can use the existing procedures. How do we account for our supplemental services, i.e. music therapy? Any supplemental services need to fall under one of the additional support services and the waiver definitions. Where does the residential site number get entered to let the DDA know which house the individual is living in?
It's not there.
Okay, we will add that in. Thank you for raising that. So in FY19, for our current population where transportation is part of the rate, do we need to do new plans to get paid for transportation? I mean, it depends on the service, right? So for the day services, transportation funding is included in the rate. There is that wheelchair add-on. If you were in personal supports and you had done an add-on somehow for transportation, that should be broken out as standalone transportation. What version of Excel is being used? So we have built this tool so that it works with Excel versions from 97 onward. So there shouldn't be issues there. Few people have one-on-one for transportation due to health and safety considerations. How would we request this funding?
I think it depends on what the service is. Is that under day that they're getting that support? Is it residential while they're being, in that service? So we would need more details.
How do providers separately request transportation for personal supports? It's the same form, just under support services. Brian, can you show that real quick?
Mm-hmm. Transportation under the support services table. Here, transportation as an upper pay limit.
Will this be located on the DDA website? It certainly will be as it's distributed. Will the rollover occur in the same way in PCIS2? It will, based on how these are set up. We've defined a process for the rollover functioning for the new waivers. What would it look like to add PT services?
It's not an authorized service, separate service.
So physical therapy, occupational therapy would be a medical service that would be under the state plan service, under health insurance, and it's not a waiver service.
Is a cost detail only due at the time of the annual plan date where there are changes to the services being received? No, I think we want to do this. The plan is when you get to an annual plan date that you do this for all services to verify that service is still needed and get to the correct authorization. The $2,000 for wheelchair is for a year. The number of days for this entire 2,000 is allocated 130. So the way that it spreads out, and this is the way that it works today. It's up to $2,000, and because it needs to be paid out, it's going to get allocated to the rate for present day. And so depending on the number of days of that service, it gets allocated across those days. Just so I'm clear, we will need to do a cost detail every year for all personal supports and add-on supports. Although Wake Overnight and personal supports for FY19 and PCIS2 will expire at the end of the fiscal year 18 or fiscal year 20. So it needs to be done on a person's annual plan date. Those authorizations will remain in PCIS2. Are we required to submit this form for all reoccurring add-ons that are automatically populated in PCIS2? Again, to do this with the annual plan date. Can you provide any clarity on when we will know the shared living rates for FY19? For right now, the shared living rates remain as is. That's a separate conversation. I see that SE required a site number. I believe it stated, if you provide only community-based SE services, how will we find this out? I believe that you currently have a licensed supported employment site, which I think for a lot of you is just your agency headquarters. Where would we put costs for professional interpreting services, since all of our individuals are deaf and require ASL, interpreter for meetings, etc.?
I don't think it's
It's not. So that's not a waiver service. I mean, that's administrative costs.
Yeah, probably.
If someone in Community Pathways waiver is getting nursing services, are we able to complete the cost detail now to allow us to bill for nursing moving in FY19? You can under the definitions of those waiver services, but only starting in fiscal 19 upon approval of the Community Pathways renewal. Can you speak again to the personal supports and the fact that the rate currently is driven by hours per week? How therefore could a budget amount be calculated without reference to the hours per week as opposed to the hours per month? PCIS2 and the current rate system for personal supports, as far as I know, has always operated on an hours per week basis. So the way that it works now, with it being a quarter-hour service, is that it looks at the annual authorization and uses that to calculate an average hours per week, and then it chooses the rate from that. If an agency has their waiver approved, can they immediately start billing for any new services under that waiver? I imagine that you're actually referencing your agency's application for services. As soon as you are approved by the DDA and receive your approval letter, you could certainly begin providing those services to individuals once they are approved. Where would supported living go in this form? At this point in time, supported living is not available. That won't be available until fiscal year 2020.
20.
Okay. Right now, we're still working through a few details with supported living, so there'll be more information to come on that. For right now, it won't be available in this form.
See if somebody's got this wrong.
Will there still be residential in lieu of day for people who do not want to leave their home during the day, or should this be personal supports? Residential service, direct support add-ons, it's going to function the exact same way that it does today. Where can we see provider admin rate included on the budget? This is the buildup of the services, and the rates are how that work. There's no separate line item for that. You mentioned these can be used right away, but they must be used right away. Must they be used right away? That's a good question. So there is obviously a transition period. For the people currently in community pathways, they can stay in their current service configurations, and the goal would be to start doing this planning as they approach their annual PCP dates. DDA will review these cost detail sheets annually, correct, and a modified service funding plan will not be needed if no change to the services. That's accurate. I mean, modified service funding plan request should be done when there's a change to the service. If an individual's matrix score is not available, can the provider use the agency average matrix score? No, they need to have their matrix score calculated. Matrix scores are requested with the modified service funding plan for new services. Should providers continue to use their agency matrix average when submitting the cost detail on the modified service funding plan?
No.
No, we really need that matrix score to be done. It should be able to be turned around quickly, and that's what the modified service funding plan should be submitted with. For residential, is nursing case management and delegation an add-on for each individual? And the answer is no, that's a standalone service. Is transportation still included in residential, or is it standalone? Transportation is included in the residential rate as it has been. There's no change there. What is an upper pay limit? Is it like the milestone after a service is provided? Effectively, I mean, upper pay limit would be a cost-based service. You're buying something for an individual. You specify what it's going to cost, and then you invoice once it's been purchased.
Okay, we only have about 4 more minutes before it automatically cuts off. So.
All right. So it sounds like we've got 4 more minutes. Just very quickly, the self-direction tab. So the self-direction tab, and Brian, I'll just say a couple words quickly about it. The self-direction tab is what will be used for people to plan their individual budgets. And so for someone who is self-directing, they'd go through this whole budget tool to identify their service need, and then go over to the self-direction tab to input what they would actually be paying for those services and to define their budget. So Brian, if you click on the self-direction tab.
Yeah, so it's going to have some services that aren't in self-direction right now, but the gist of it is the services that you select on the budget tab automatically populate, and then you're asked to basically build a service rate for that individual that's receiving self-direction services, filling out their tax percentage, their wage, benefits, training, and the hours per week or monthly rate they need that service. And then you can adjust your budget up or down. The units can go up or down 10%. You can use savings from your budget between your traditional rates and the rates that you build for the person in self-direction to pay for support broker services, individual and family directed goods and services. It won't be relevant to a lot of the folks on the phone, but this will be the tab that you fill out.
And the goal was to use a single. A tool to meet both the needs of someone in traditional service and the needs for someone self-directing. Can I answer 2 more questions, or do you want to close with something, Ron?
Well, I don't want it to automatically cut off. What we'll do is we'll have to follow up on the remaining questions because it's going to automatically cut off at some point, like in the next 2 to 3 minutes. So this is probably a good time to wrap it up, but thank you, Daniel and Brian, for participating. And thank all of you for listening in. I mean, a lot of good questions, and we still have a few more to follow up to respond to. But we hope that this has been helpful in kind of helping you to understand, how to use the cost detail sheet. And again, a copy of this webinar will be posted on the DDA website. And we will also be following up with some additional written guidance and instructions to go along with this presentation. And that's all I have. And so if there's nothing else, this will conclude this webinar. Thanks again. Have a good day.